This is the story of the lizard man of Scape Ore Swamp. Christopher Davis was 17, driving home along Browntown Road after closing a shift at the local McDonald's. His car, a 1976 Toyota Celica, blew a tire right at the edge of the swamp. He pulled over, got out, and started working the jack in the dark, with nothing around him but tree frogs and the sound of his own hands on the tire iron. He hears something moving toward him out of the dark. That's when he says he heard something running toward him across the asphalt. What came out of the tree line, in his account, was close to 7 feet tall. Green, wet-looking skin. Red eyes. 3 fingers on each hand. By the time he gets back in his car, it's already too late to just drive away. He got back in the car and tried to drive off. And the creature, he said, jumped onto the roof and held on as he swerved down the road, trying to throw it. Eventually, it lost its grip and fell away into the dark behind him. When Davis got home, the roof of his car was dented. The side mirror was gone, and there were long scratches down the door. He didn't go to the police right away. He was afraid of being laughed at. It was his mother who eventually reported the damage to the car. And it was that report, not the sighting itself, that first got Lee County Sheriff Liston Truesdale involved. When investigators sat Davis down, he gave a formal statement and sketched what he'd seen. He later took a polygraph test about his account. He passed it. If the story had stopped there, it might have stayed a local rumor. It didn't. Deep scratches, torn off trim, one bumper that looked, in the sheriff's words, chewed. Within days, other residents around the swamp started reporting damage to their own vehicles. A farmer said something had been getting into his livestock. A man about to take off from a small grass airstrip nearby said a 9-foot creature crossed in front of his plane and made him abort the flight. Deputies investigating the area found large 3-toed footprints in the mud and made plaster casts of them. By August, the story had run in more than 100 newspapers. A radio station in Columbia put up $1 million reward for anyone who could capture the creature alive. A reward that was never claimed. Sheriff's deputies said they were fielding calls from as far away as New Zealand. Truesdale, who by all accounts treated the case with a mix of genuine seriousness and dry humor, later said the Lizard Man had put Lee County on the map in a way nothing else ever had. Not every report held up. The story didn't end there, though, not for the town and not for Christopher Davis. Bishopville leaned into what had happened. In early August, an airman stationed at nearby Shaw Air Force Base named Kenneth Orr told police he'd encountered the creature on Highway 15 and shot it, presenting scales and a small amount of blood as proof. Truesdale had the material tested. The scales were fish scales. As summer turned to fall, the sightings slowed and then stopped almost entirely. No further encounters were ever conclusively documented, and no physical evidence, the footprint casts included, was ever verified as belonging to anything other than a known animal. Orr was arrested, not for the story itself, but for illegally carrying the weapon he claimed to have used, and for filing a false police report. He later admitted he'd invented the whole account just to keep the story alive a little longer. A black bear wandering through unfamiliar territory on the edge of town, in the dark at exactly the wrong moment for a teenager with a flat tire. Some investigators who looked at the case afterward have been openly skeptical of the entire chain of events, pointing out inconsistencies in how the story was reported and retold over time. The most common explanation offered then and now is simpler than a swamp monster. Today there's a Lizard Man festival, a parade, a line dance, a small concrete statue of the creature standing in town, and a gift shop's worth of merchandise built around a monster nobody ever definitively proved was real. For a struggling small town, the Lizard Man became, in a strange way, an economic engine. For Davis, the attention was heavier. He gave interviews, signed autographs, served as a grand marshal at a local parade, and according to the sheriff who knew him, was at one point invited onto a national talk show and turned it down. Truesdale later said he believed the constant retelling simply became too much for a teenager to carry. Davis eventually moved away from Bishopville to nearby Sumter, largely out of the public eye. Within weeks, his story had traveled to newspapers in over 100 cities. Within a year, it had reached Japan. Nearly 4 decades later, a small town in Lee County still hasn't let it go. In June of 2009, Christopher Davis was shot and killed at his home in Sumter County. He was 37. Authorities described it as a drug-related shooting. 2 suspects were later arrested and charged. It had nothing to do with the swamp or the creature or the summer that made him briefly famous at 17. But nearly every headline covering his death still called him first, the Lizard Man Witness, a label he'd spent 2 decades trying to put down. Whatever did or didn't happen on Browntown Road in the summer of 1988, it's worth sitting with that fact for a moment. A story that brought a small town a strange kind of hope followed one of its central figures for the rest of his life, right up to the headlines written after it ended. Casts that are still on display today at the South Carolina Cotton Museum in Bishopville, sitting in a glass case near the front door. The footprint casts are still in that glass case at the Cotton Museum. If you ever find yourself in Bishopville, whether they belong to anything is, all these years later, still an open question. Bishopville, South Carolina, sits about 45 minutes east of Columbia, a small town of a few thousand people built on cotton money that had mostly dried up by the 1980s. Just south of town is Scape Ore Swamp, 95 square miles of low-lying wetland, cypress knees, and slow black water that drains eventually into the Pee Dee River. The name predates anything you're about to hear by 2 centuries. But on the night of June 29th, 1988, that swamp became the center of a story that's still being told. Every case on this channel ends somewhere unresolved. This one just ends somewhere a little more human than most. Next time, another file, another name worth remembering,